Did Toby Fox compose everything in Undertale? Questions of music stealing in Undertale's soundtrack have been brought to my attention. When I made the Undying Music Theory video, I credited Toby Fox as the sole composer. But looking into it now, the actual credits actually make no mention of the music, composer or otherwise. Meanwhile, the character designs have very specific itemized crediting, so it was actually an assumption to attribute Toby as the sole composer. I can't find word on this from any official source, and notably the soundtrack is not called the Undertale original soundtrack, it's just Undertale soundtrack. It also has no info on the music's composer. This is different from a video game soundtrack that presents itself as the original soundtrack, sometimes stating composed by outright. So with a lot of existing gray area between originality, inspiration, and something more concerning, this video will outline the numerous very specific composition similarities between Spear of Justice and Skyfire's By God Forsaken. Because in the Undying Music Theory video, many of the composition choices I analyzed and celebrated can be found in this single composition. Meanwhile, I'm not a judge or lawyer and won't be making any accusations suggesting a specific sequence of real-life events that led to these composition similarities. But I will instead limit the conclusions around that word that starts with O that you saw on Sea of Stars and Hades a little earlier. This video has the following 3 sections, with a focus on the music theory in the first 2. Part 1 will debunk the superficial differences between the anchor riffs in both songs. Part 2 will identify each of the multiple similarities between the compositions beyond the riff in terms of structure and harmonic narrative. Part 3 is technically optional, where I'll speak in a personal capacity on how I'm reacting to this. And by the end of this video, I will have put the ball in Toby's court, as well as everyone in the community, with constructive recommendations on next steps. Some elements of this topic may vary by country, but I bought the game for the Nintendo Switch in Massachusetts, so I can only speak from my home turf. Here's a side-by-side comparison of Spear and Forsaken as piano arrangements. These significant similarities were presented in a community post on my channel, and one of the responses was, but it's in a different key. Changing the key of a composition is analogous to taking the Mona Lisa and tinting it green. If I take the Simpsons theme written in C major, if I transpose it to the key of G flat major, I have not done any composing. The structure still has all the same balanced constituent parts, it makes the same statement despite the tint. The same contour of notes are all spatially arranged in relation to each other in the same manner. Transposing to a different key is sometimes involved in the process of arranging, when creating an adaptation of an existing composition. Another thing pointed out was, the scale degrees are different. So although the position on the scale is technically different, what's important is that the same melodic contour is present, the same shape at the same timing. In terms of the 3 melody motions of steps, skips, and leaps, both Spear and Forsaken make their first move down by leap, up by skip, down by step, then down by skip. What's important here are not the particular values, but rather the ratios accomplished by said values. To understand how superficial this particular aspect is, consider this case study creating a similar pair of alike melodies via a quick alteration of the Star Wars theme song. So in this example, we're not even changing the key, it's still in B flat major like the original, but we're shifting up the entire shape to elsewhere in the scale. But see how all the notes still exist in the same structural shape relative to each other note, with chord tone status in alignment with the original? If I did this to the Star Wars theme song, I would not have a basis to say that it was an original composition of mine, nor is the presence of this difference in Spear a clear-cut indication that it's an original composition. Now, if you've watched this far into the video, I want to thank you. All this video asks is for you to look at this objectively, to put aside your feelings and bias as devoted fans of this game and its creator. This is a capital G game that defined an era of your life, or got you through a tough time, or even influenced your own creative arc. It's because of this game that you feel seen, taking comfort in a shared sense of humor and fascinating lore. And I'm with you. Heat's Flamesman is enough to make me want to become an Undertale content creator. The fact is, Undertale fans don't deserve something like this, but meanwhile Toby deserves to have this happen to his fans. Through the process of game development, he has invited us into emotional investment in his saga on the implicit contract involved in buying and playing a new game. So as a person who's encountered these discoveries in the game, I want to offer genuine condolence that this discussion even needs to happen, because you don't deserve it, but the game's creator and steward does. If you lack music theory fundamentals and are thrown off the scent by something like a different key, the best course would be for you to seek out musician friends with theory experience and have them weigh in on this case study, preferably without disclosing your great admiration for the game up front. You should think of this video not as a comprehensive final report, but rather as a video serving as the start of your research. There's nothing in this video you have to take my word on. You should verify any applicable aspects of this discussion yourself. So the next claim that your musician friend can shed light on is the observation that the time signature is different. Spear's measure has 6 beats to Forsaken's 5. The note taking the spot of this extra beat is a sturdy tonic chord tone 5, which does not upset the apple cart of what came before it. The anchor riff defines itself in relation to the first 5 beats in both compositions. But understand that if I arrange a piece in a different time signature, I'm not composing. It's still just arranging. For example, I did an arrangement of Sonic 3's Balloon Park that revised the time signature from 4/4 to a 3/4 waltz. I took the original composition's fundamental architecture and represented it using a different delivery method. And I did add notes that weren't in the source composition, artistic decisions I made in the context of the new 3/4 waltz format. But I did not compose when I did this. It took me a few minutes to put together, and I'm very proud of this arrangement, but the key word is arrangement. It has a drastically different feel, but that point in itself most certainly does not make this an original composition. The same pitched events are happening timed to the beginning of each measure. Now, it is fair enough to say that no one can copyright a modest set of fairly logical notes such as Skyfire's use of 5-1-3-2-7. Lava Reef Act 2 from Sonic & Knuckles has the same sequence of notes. But with the Spear comparison, we're looking not only at the exact same moment of the song structure, but also with the same contour shape and also specific syncopation choices, with the notes and rests landing in clean alignment. But hold on, said another commenter, these notes were already established earlier in the soundtrack. Well, yes, in the teaser prelude, the pitch sequence is played in straight eighths. The Asgore reprise has the notes in asymmetrical note divisions. But in a vanilla playthrough, the main event of Undyne's whole deal has Skyfire overlap with this contour of notes occurring with the same syncopated timing, as well as many other completely separate similarities to be discussed in part 2 of this video, but right now part 1 is only about the anchor riff. Toby's Tumbler is said to contain a chronicle of Spear of Justice's creation, but for me to comment on it would be speculative, so let's hold off until Toby speaks to the component of Skyfire's song. If Undertale's soundtrack includes obvious intended inspiration by tracks from Brandish or Kirby and such, and we're supposed to know that it's an inspiration rather than malicious theft, then a similar transparency needs to be brought to Skyfire's composition, because in Spear we're seeing not just notes occurring at all the same times, but the tonic chord tone classification falls in neat alignment almost completely, and certainly in every important location in terms of the hierarchy of beats. An important engine of what constitutes a composition is whether a note is part of the home base 1 chord, which we call tonic chord tones versus tonic non-chord tones. and functionally it's useful to describe these as firm versus tense. Tension and resolution is an integral part of the story a composition tells, and chord tone substitutions should not in themselves be mistaken for composition. These substitutions do provide fodder for a lot of creative choices, such as when you see a live concert performance and the singer makes impromptu alterations to a song you know and love. This provides a stylized twist on the composition while still keeping the fundamental structure intact. For example, the White Stripes' third album includes the melody You may encounter chord tone substitutions in live shows such as SNL. These variations add a new flavor within the parameters of the same foundation of chords and melody timing. The 3-2-1 becomes 5-5-1. So ending at the same destination of 1, but the starting point swapped out the chord tone 3 for chord tone 5. And he trimmed most non-chord tones. It's mostly firm notes now. But even despite these changes, we would not say that Jack composed a new song here. It's just an arrangement, so to speak, that occurs in a live performance with impromptu possibilities. And there's so many options, such as centering the action on the 7, which is a sort of no man's land of a tonic chord tone versus non-chord tone, depending on the structure. And that's what Jack did for this very same melody in the Blackpool DVD, and it's great. Three variations, one composition. Only one composition. In the Skyfire comparison, all the critical chord tones align, and all but one non-chord tone. But even that's the No Man's Land minor 7. Now, at this point, you might be thinking that the criteria I'm talking about is arbitrary or misleading, but Smash creator Sakurai's YouTube channel has a concise video explaining that when creating original music for something like a video game, it can be useful to reference an existing song as a point of reference or inspiration, so long as you're not lifting riffs. But exercise caution, because if you grow too attached to a source inspiration, the resulting work can risk sounding like a cheap imitation. So already Spear of Justice has failed to meet this very basic bar of the riff shouldn't be such a match, particularly the syncopation. Use the vocabulary of your inspiration to write a new paragraph, but don't write the same paragraph, and be cautious about complete sentences. For the LEGO Dimensions Sonic Level Pack, the composers at Traveler's Tales wrote new musical sentences using the vocabulary of Sonic 1's title theme. But with some of Undertale's examples, what we're looking at are much more drastic similarities in composition, while it's the feel that's dramatically altered. But new feel does not mean new composition. If you argue that Toby definitely wrote an original composition on the basis that the feel is different, you have accidentally just described arrangement, not composition. You can dramatically alter the feel with the composition intact, like this Siva Gunnar arrangement of the Friends theme song. Drastically different feel, same composition. A remix does not constitute an original composition. So next is the claim that this process is just inspiration, and that if Toby Fox stole music, then all your favorite composers did. We are now going to clear up a lot of gray area on this tricky domain of how the word inspiration is used. When we talk about inspiration, what we're talking about is throughout your life of listening to different music, you notice and pick up little strands of DNA, picking up individual methods and maneuvers, which could include fragments of specific licks. And when you go to town composing, what you have is a finished composition that contains, among other things, a melting pot of DNA, with any number of inspired elements, like a melody with the playful agility of Sonic 3, heavily syncopated Dreamland 3 bass lines, a chord change that Radiohead used, another chord change from Sufjan Stevens, and percussion enrichment techniques you heard in T. Lope's compositions. By absorbing inspiration from so many different sources, you synthesize these stylized colors to make a new painting within the same general playground. And one thing your DNA has to do is serve as the structural glue that connects it all together in an original way that makes sense. Many of the see also notations you'll see in this video will point you to a source inspiration from which a the composer used one single strand of inspiration as one of many ingredients in the stew. You will not see any of these examples draw multiple composition choice ingredients from a single source in a manner that it ends up resembling the song structure of the original. It should not be the case that a Beatles pastiche parody distinguishes itself as an original composition far more than Spear does. So in what we've examined so far, it's one thing if the riff is the same, worse yet that it shares not just the pitch contour, but also the timing with syncopation. So it is very unfortunate that we are nowhere close to being done with the list of specific composition choices Spear shares with Forsaken.
Meow, 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 meow.
This riff could potentially be used in any number of expressive ways in the context of chord changes or sequence of events with segments of slow burn or impact, but Spear of Justice uses the momentum of this riff to travel to the same very specific places in the same order, by breaking the riff's stalemate with an explosive 6th chord built on the minor 6th interval as the root at the very start of measure 4. Then instead of moving one chord up, Spear goes one down, then loop the whole thing. In my music theory videos, I frequently highlight specific notable composition choices, and one of them for Spear was a 1 semitone key change immediately following the opening cycles of the main hook. I explained that this is cool and out of the ordinary because typically this move is a cliche in pop songs to give the final repeating chorus an exciting lift toward the end of the song. But here Spear does it in the middle of section A, which was bold and awesome and made sense to me in light of the incremental battle restarts further on the bridge. This very specific composition choice also occurs in Forsaken after 2 cycles of the main hook. You find out Toby's process is to make the music first and then put together the scene. If so, then the incremental battle restarts are an effective representation of the composition choice to key change up 1 semitone after the opening cycles of this main hook. And the Undyne video highlighted Section A's concluding method of extending the turnaround by repeating it, while the waves of attacks won't relent. Forsaken's first section also concludes with this same manner of turnaround extension. If your response is to say that the number of extensions is different, as if that's relevant, well, we have to distinguish this turnaround extension as a composition choice that's a unique event that happens only once at the very end of Section A to propel the action into Section B. The quantity of extensions is just an attribute of the composition decision itself. What's most unsettling is finding not only these macro similarities of the overall structure, but also on the micro level when zooming in on the details. The turnaround used in all cycles of Section A has 6 notes, always, every cycle, but in the very last measure of the section, we see the specific, unique, one-time choice to trim the turnaround notes from 6 to 4, and with a finishing staccato emphasis on the 4th and final note. Now make no mistake, there are chunks of composition unique to Spear outside the overlapping key events, but these notes all work around the anchor riff without disturbing it, and certainly benefit from, and derive their identity from, the harmonic motion generated by the anchor riff. In a vacuum, a 5-4-3-2-1 walk-down is not particularly interesting or memorable, so as a composition choice, it only makes sense in what it conveys, having just followed the more distinct dynamic action of the repeating core riff. You could play 5-4-3-2 in a vacuum in all quarter notes, and it's gonna play like a 5-year-old's My First Melody project. But put that in context at the tail end of an explosively active sequence in Flying Battery from Sonic 3, and it provides a deeply impactful presence to round out the phrase. So to point at individual DNA strands that differ from Skyfire's are not in themselves absolution, because in this instance these notes embellish the main hook without affecting its wake. So both compositions' first 30 seconds have these structural parallels of a beginning, middle, and end. Every major composition checkpoint in Spear's first section also appears in Forsaken, in the same order. If there's a percentage of viewers still insisting that this is definitely a coincidence, let's now consider another totally separate similarity much later in both songs of a reverse Andalusian cadence set of chords, in both cases appearing for the first time no earlier than Section C. And you bet this got its own dedicated segment in the Undyne music theory video, because it's a distinctive composition choice that plays a role in the core identity of the song, which I introduced by first playing a traditional Andalusian cadence with an arrangement of Snowdon's theme in the style of Gerudo Valley. Both Spear and Forsaken have chords on scale degrees 1, 5, 6, 7, 1, with Spear's 5 chord having the raised 7th. I had seen enough when I got to the key change, with insult to injury in the turnaround extensions and trimming the very last 2 notes. The reverse Andalusian cadence showing up much deeper into both compositions just exacerbates this into an even sadder circus. The Spear of Justice unused version has the anchor riff and the reverse Andalusian cadence. Anyone watching this has more than enough information to arrive at a verdict. And this severe set of overlaps is far more pronounced than the average video game music examples from other games and composers. Because it's drastic, it needed to be described with precision to establish that this severe degree of overlap is not the status quo. If you say all composers do this, no, they definitely don't. No one is obligated to sign on to this sentiment because it cheapens and belittles the accomplishments of all the composers who understand how to go about inspiration with integrity and originality. In their compositions, you will not find such an extensive array of DNA overlaps with another specific creative work that came before it. More than 20 years into the Sonic series, T. Lopes came on board to create original compositions such as the Mania Special Stage song, which is one of the most truly Sonic tracks in the whole series, while standing as a composition that is fully original. Lopes did not J.J. Abramsify the bass line from the Sonic 2 special stages. Instead, he used the existing grammar of the vibe to write totally new musical statements and stories within the same stylistic playground. That's what composing is. On the other hand, have you ever encountered the phrase music by? The songs heard in this video from the Mega Drive game Wolfchild credits the tracks as music by Matt Furness, adapted from the original music in the Amiga version by Martin Iveson. If you compare the Amiga originals to the Mega Drive adaptations, you'll find plenty of new composition choices and structural elements, but with the original composition's foundation very much intact. I'm left to wonder if some version of this workflow happened with Undertale's soundtrack, at least when looking at the liner notes music credits of who did what in what capacity. Which, by the way, these notes are not even consistent between the CD and vinyl versions. The more you discover about this situation, the more convenient becomes the long-time policy of never answering unscreened questions. So where do we go from here? We're approaching Undertale's 10th anniversary, and it took 9 years for these Skyfire similarities to be documented and reported to a wide audience. So my constructive suggestion for Toby is to explain what happened with this, and if applicable, apologize and commit to never doing it again in the future. I say if applicable, because I'm not willing or even able to make any formal accusation of a timeline of what went on behind the scenes. You have to consider any plausible possibilities, like Toby collaborated with a composer who presented these composition choices as original, or Toby had an agreement with Skyfire or their representative. These are just two quickly brainstormed possibilities, and there's so many other potential ones, so it won't do any good to speculate further until Toby clarifies. This video has not shown Toby's professional-facing cartoon dog avatar, because Toby is a real person who made tangible choices involving creative original works by other very real people, and purchased by real Bostonians. It would be inappropriate to obscure the reality of this situation with the insulation of Toby's faux virtual stand-in. If Toby is self-taught, he may have not had the music teacher, band leader, or composition mentor to advise him on how to go about the composition process with integrity, maintaining a respect for the original works of the composers that came before him. My fond appreciation for the game should not have to be in conflict with the basic tenets of composition integrity. So direct transparency is necessary, because the way Undertale presents its credits borders on offensive, with a glaring inconsistency in how it handles visual artwork versus music. Why is there a glorified victory lab detailing itemized credits for character designs and even special inspirations behind artistic choices, but literally nothing of the kind for the game's compositions? But make way for everyone who gave Toby cash. This deafening silence is suspicious and off-putting. And as someone who bought and enjoyed the game and celebrated and promoted it on my channel, it puts me in an unfair, uncomfortable bind of being blindsided by this. Some of what comes out of Toby's mouth takes some serious nerve and/or naivete, which is not helped by Toby insulating himself from genuine feedback. It's added context to a few situations, and my business manager whipped up a few prospective topics, and is ready to greenlight them on a different channel, with a wait-and-see attitude in the meantime, pending the results of community discussions about this video. If any aspiring creators are considering a reclusive policy of no questions in interviews, well, videos like the one you're watching now are the consequence of people honoring that policy. If this seems dramatic, this is just me being entertaining to make the delivery of this constructive commentary bearable and memorable. That was the approach of Sibbles when chronicling the baffling headaches and aggressive condescension that Undertale content creators have dealt with, which coincidentally also involves Undertale's music. If this video is satirizing Tobes, it's so that in the coming years he has an incentive to treat everyone in the Undertale fanbase a lot better. With most other composers, I would have reached out privately to communicate with an open mind, and maybe by the end of the discussion I'd have a new pal. This Boston imagery is shown to make the point that I'm a real person who conducts himself with open transparency. At the Boston Common, I ran a weekly discussion group about mindfulness and setting goals. On a symbolic level, this entire video is just another entry in that kind of public discussion, dialoguing with people from all backgrounds here in the real world. In the meantime, the hypocrisy to reckon with is that of Toby striving to participate in the reality of game development selectively. If you want to let him off the hook because it was supposed to be an 8 out of 10 niche indie game from the Wild West of the internet, well, as a starting point, I don't agree with that, because audience size has zero bearing on expectations of crediting creative works, as well as the definition of an original composition. But even if someone did grant that niche indie exception, it would quickly fall apart in light of Toby completely embracing Undertale's ascension to a status of video game royalty. The game has been released on every major platform. Its soundtrack received the Symphony Orchestra treatment, plus a character in Smash and a Pokemon composer credit. He seems ready to drop everything if he can help with Mother 4, to say nothing of how this might affect Deltarune's release timetable. And how many Deltarune slices have come out so far? I would need to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head. But even this we gotta take with a grain of salt, in case it's not actually Toby talking in this interview. You can never really know when someone primarily uses text-to-speech generation in this context. It's one thing if Toby had early career stumbles, but his continued silence on this topic is impossible to reconcile as a fan who witnesses this and is expected to accept it as normal. If you disagree that Toby's compositions are at the extreme end of the originality continuum, and you think he belongs closer to here, then who are these other composers that you say do the same things as Toby, which by comparison makes Toby's approach average and normal? What songs did they compose that share such a wide variety of different DNA overlaps with a previous work by someone else? And if other video game composers should be held accountable for specific decisions they've made in the same neighborhood of this topic, then yeah, we should impartially examine each and establish how severe of an issue it is. That way, aspiring composers can make informed judgment calls, so it can help to calibrate our assessments with a general criteria in these 3 buckets: original, less innovative original, and not an original. The green pan is the classification for original compositions through and through, like the Lawnmower Man intro theme on Genesis or Sleeping Lessons by the Shins, and all the examples cited earlier that implemented their influences responsibly. The yellow pan category involves an overlap of perhaps 1 measure in length, so the idea that there's only 12 notes actually does apply here, because yeah, there is a reasonably finite number of possibilities in such a small duration, so it can often still stand as an original composition, but, less innovative. And if this similarity occurs in the same manner at the same key moment that defines the song, it's like, alright, lame, I see what you did, no one's writing you a ticket, but no one's nominating it for an Innovative Composition Award either. Finally, the red pan category contains songs that are not original compositions. And here's the easiest way of putting it with a hypothetical scenario. Imagine if you had composed by Godforsaken and then joined a band with Toby. Toby reviews your back catalog for ideas and then puts together Spear of Justice. But then a couple weeks before the album comes out, you're informed that you will not be credited as a composer for the song. Whether you object to that decision speaks directly to how you'd answer the question of whether Spear of Justice is an original composition. As is the case for Sonic the Hedgehog's Marble Zone and Final Zone, Super Mario World's main level theme, and Gene's Rockabye and God Hand. It's pretty simple. 1 measure of content is weak sauce, but not the end of the world. Push it to 2 measures and beyond, used at the most important defining moment of the song. I will never partake in calling these original compositions. Inspiration involves taking 1 thing from 8 different sources, not taking 5 things and replicating the beginning, middle, and end, as you will hear in Gene's Rockabye. All composers do this? No. I am not one of those composers, and you will never speak on my behalf. Expectations about composing original music may differ by country. I bought all of these games in Obama land, and this discussion applies domestically first and foremost. So if you're talking through this with someone and a composition you consider green is something they consider to be red or vice versa, well, YouTube's comment section is not the place where you're going to get on the same page if you're that much of a world apart. The green, yellow, red criteria is the standard by which you can calibrate your assessments with someone else's. If you want to say that the original composition standards applied to recording artists are in any way different from the standards we apply to music created primarily for video games, you have accidentally talked yourself into a corner by revealing the underlying cause of your disagreement. So it's good that we can clear up that between an album available at Best Buy or a video game you get on Steam, the standards of what makes an original composition are identical, exactly the same. When Sea of Stars puts the word original on its cover, it means something specific. And anyway, many video games commonly release their soundtrack as a standalone trademark copyrighted album on CD or vinyl or Spotify. The reason for making this video is to clarify what it means to compose music, to write an original composition, to author a pitched sequence of timed harmonic events. My professional presence deals with the finer points of music theory and composition, and I refuse to cheapen the accomplishments of visionary composers who write with originality, showing vulnerability by taking risks to create new experiences. So if you just double down that there's only 12 notes, this is just inspiration. All composers do this. No, they don't. Many composers take great care to avoid these exact crutches and pitfalls. They understand the dangers of gravitating toward the path of least resistance in this particular domain of a creative odyssey. One troubling sentiment expressed to me was, the way Toby composes is very earthbound, and I'm here for it. Well, if Mother 3 lifts entire melody phrases from composers like the Beatles, and Toby takes his cues from Earthbound, and millions of Undertale fans take cues from Toby, then the vicious cycle ends today, right now, and from here out you can never say that you haven't been told. Conducting yourself in this way could land you in a great deal of stress, and that would be fully deserved stress. You might say that this is much ado about nothing, because is Undertale really competing with Skyfire for a market share? Would they even care about a co-composer credit or a revenue share? That is not the purpose of this video, and perhaps if everyone plays it cool on that aspect, we can all continue to have nice things. Because the actual purpose of this video is a reverence for the art and craft of composition, for the basic aspect of creative artists receiving accurate credit for their original creative works. And look, I can absolutely understand where you're coming from as a starting point, because I was guilty of this hasty dismissal too at first. The Skyfire example was brought to my attention shortly after the Undyne video, and after a quick sniff test, I admit to burying my head in the sand. Maybe because I was so captivated by Undertale's soundtrack that I was just wholly unprepared to accept a complicating factor of such disruption. Or maybe due to the embarrassment of how this might recontextualize the music theory analysis that I had provided in the video. I was caught off guard, but I am sorry that I did that. It was over a year later when I incidentally used a Relax-a-Lax clip as a visual gag when talking about Smash, which prompted me to catch up on his more recent videos, which brought the topic back to my attention, at which time I realized I was ready for a thorough review that I now felt prepared to carry out regardless of the outcome. Toby Fox is a genius and a prodigy, and anyone who played the game can recognize that. People get caught cutting corners at the highest level, and that doesn't automatically negate their distinguished excellence. All of this is to show that the question asked in the title of this video is a fully appropriate inquiry. If Undertale is full of genius that we do have reason to believe genuinely came from Toby's unique creativity, that does not alleviate or mitigate targeted concerns on severe overlaps in composition choices or art direction. It's jarring to see career advice from commenters who were disappointed that I'm using my music theory knowledge to embarrass myself by throwing my weight behind this topic. But the opposite of these claims is true, because with my music theory knowledge and experience composing, love for video games, and instructional educational format of my channel all make me uniquely qualified and even responsible to rise to an occasion as specific and sensitive as this. A lot of people can muster the bravery to stand up to their enemies, but standing up to your friends is a whole different deal. My channel has Mixolydian scales and ukulele jokes. This is a responsibility that I did not seek out, but I've recognized it and accept it willingly. I came across this situation organically in the course of teaching composition principles passionately. As an Undertale fan who played the game and made a loving tribute in a music theory video, I've now thoroughly established my reaction and response to these discoveries. As to how the conversation continues from here, this is an important choice of paths you now have to make on your own personal journey as an independent thinker within the Undertale community, especially with the 10th anniversary on the horizon. Undertale is a game about the pitfalls of apathy and how to overcome that with determination, faith in yourself, and shared values in the context of honest teamwork. You're now in full control of which path you choose. With this video complete, you're now fully aware of the path to which I and other composers will always be committed.